The Kreth of our children were dying and no one in the medical bay could explain why the math wasn't working. I knew because I watched them eat. The physicians didn't watch. They measured. They had the body mass index for every child on the manifest, and they had the caloric tables their archive had produced over 400 years of nutritional science. And they had the dispensary units that produced a gray paste of precise composition, and when the children refused it or brought it back up, they increased the concentration. Because the formula said the children needed more, not less. The formula was never wrong. The Krethovar had built their entire civilization on the certainty that it was never wrong. I had been a mess cook for 11 years on 3 different resettlement lanes. I had no formula for anything. I cooked by weight and smell, and what seemed right, and I kept my galley clean, and I fed whoever was hungry, and that was the whole of my expertise. There were 41 Krethovar children aboard the Aldrin's Grace on that Lane 7 run. By the 3rd week out, 14 of them were refusing food entirely, and 6 of those 14 were on IV nutrition because their bodies had begun rejecting the paste at the cellular level. The lead physician, a tall Krethovar male named Sareth Orun, explained this to me in clipped, formal standard when he came to requisition additional paste stock from my galley stores. He was not unkind. He was simply precise. The children's caloric deficit was 340 units per body mass cycle and climbing. He had escalated the paste's protein density twice. He would escalate it a 3rd time. The formula required it. I gave him the paste stock and watched him go. Then I went to the passenger corridor where the Krethovar families were quartered, because I had a question I wanted to ask. Not of the physician, of the girl. Her name was Veth. I did not learn her name until later. Her mother gave it to me on the 39th morning, quietly, in the way you give a name to someone you have decided to trust. On that first day, she was only the smallest of the sick children, sitting against the corridor wall with her knees drawn up, watching me the way children watch strangers they have already decided not to speak to. She was 7 years old. She had her mother's ridge pattern across both cheekbones and her father's coloring, a pale greenish silver that had gone dull in the 3 weeks since boarding. Krethovar who are well are luminous. Krethovar who are starving go flat. I did not speak Krethovar and she did not speak standard, so I held up both hands, empty, to show I had nothing in them, and I went back to my galley. The next morning I was at the corridor before the dispensary made its rounds. I had brought a small steel prep bowl and a bag of rolled oats from my own galley stock, the ones I kept for the human passengers who wanted porridge, and I sat down on the deck with my back against the opposite wall and I began to count. I did not know how many grains were right. I started with 100, because 100 seemed a small amount, and I cooked them in the prep bowl on a portable burner until they were soft, and I carried the bowl down the corridor and set it on the deck in front of Veth and stepped back. She looked at the bowl for a long time. Then she picked it up and ate 3 grains and put it down. 3 out of 100. I took that as information. The next morning I brought 80 grains. She ate 11. The morning after that I brought 60. She ate 22. I kept a tally on a strip of galley tape stuck to the inside of my left wrist. The count I had brought that day. The count she ate. The count remaining. My handwriting was small. The strip filled up by day 9. I was not following a formula. I was following her. On the mornings when she had slept badly, her number went down. On the mornings when she had been sitting up in the corridor already, with color returning to her ridges, her number went up. On day 14 she ate 39 and looked at me with an expression I could not fully read, and then looked at the empty bowl, and I understood she was telling me I had brought too few. On day 15 I brought 52, and she ate 39 again, and I understood I had overcorrected. I brought 44 on day 16. She ate 41, and left 3 in the bowl, not pushing it away but simply stopping, the way you stop when you are full and not when you are giving up. 41. That was the first number that felt like a conversation rather than a guess. By the end of the 3rd week she was eating every morning. Her mother began appearing in the corridor doorway, watching. By the end of the 4th week, 2 of the other sick children were sitting in the corridor at the same hour, and I was counting grains for 3 bowls instead of 1. Each count different, each arrived at through the same patient tally and adjust that had taken Veth 11 days to find. Sareth Orun found me in my galley on the morning of day 38. He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching me count grains into 3 separate bowls, which is a slow process when you are working with rolled oats and a strip of galley tape, and a method that has no name. He asked me what formula I was using. I told him I was not using a formula. I was using the number from the morning before, adjusted by how the child had looked when I arrived. He was quiet for a long time. I kept counting. 301. I was on Veth's bowl, which had climbed steadily since the 41 threshold and plateaued somewhere in the high 200s, 302, 303. He asked if I could produce the calculation that generated the number. I told him the calculation was, this is how many she ate yesterday, and today she had color in her ridges and was already sitting up, so I added 12. He said that was not a calculation. I said I knew that. I said it was a guess, that had been corrected 42 times in a row and was now, as far as I could tell, no longer a guess. He stood there while I finished counting. 312. I wrote it on the galley tape. On the morning of day 42, Veth held down 312 grains, and then held up the bowl and looked at me, and what her face said was, there should be more. I wrote a question mark after 312, and brought 330 the next morning, and she ate 327 and left 3, and her face said, that is the number. Not hunger, not formula, the number that felt right. 327. We stayed there for a week. Then she began to grow. Sarath Arun came back on the last day of the run, when the Aldrin's Grace was 2 hours from dock. He had a notation tablet with him. He said he had reviewed the dispensary data against my galley tape records, which he had asked his staff to copy in full, and the recovery pattern in the 3 children I had been feeding was statistically inconsistent with every model the Krethovar Nutrition Archive had ever produced for juvenile resettlement malnutrition. I said I was sorry I didn't have a formula for him. He said he did not need a formula. He needed to understand what the variable was. I thought about it while I cleaned the prep bowls. Then I said, I think the variable is that I was asking her, and she was answering, and neither of us had a shared language except the count. He wrote something on his notation tablet. He was quiet for a while, writing. Then he said that the Krethovar Nutrition Archive maintained a separate index for anomalous datasets, cases that did not fit the existing caloric models, and that he was going to log this one there. He asked what I would call the methodology. I said I would not call it a methodology. I would call it paying attention. He wrote that down too. I do not know how the entry reads exactly. He showed me the first line before he left the galley, and I could not read the Krethovar notation, but he translated it for me. Compassion calibration. Origin, human. Forward galley. Resettlement lane 7. Primary datum. 312 grains of Terran rolled oat, counted by hand, adjusted daily, arrived at through 42 consecutive mornings of observation without formula. The rest of the entry, he said, would take some time to write. Veth waved at me from the docking corridor when her family disembarked. She was luminous by then, her ridges fully bright, her coloring back. She did not hold up her hand the way humans wave. She held up both palms, empty, the way I had held mine up on that first morning in the corridor. I held mine up back. 312 grains. That was all it was. A count arrived at slowly, corrected 41 times. That turned out to be the number a frightened child's body would accept when nothing else would do. I wrote it on a fresh strip of galley tape and stuck it to the inside of my wrist for the next run.